when we started this preparation of this conference, the situation was way different actually, because because the vote of this regulation was supposed to be a formality. Today it's not exactly the same case. So, Edward, what should we do in this context? What does this imply? Does this mean we can stop the conference?
No, otherwise that wouldn't really be nice to the audience, obviously. So we had a step back yesterday because initially there was an agreement at the end of December 2023 where the Parliament and the Council agreed to adopt what we call the CS3D, so the due diligence directive. And then there was a U-turn initiated by a country I will not name, but that Johannes will be able to speak about. And that U-turn meant that yesterday the Council finally decided not to adopt CS3D and to leave it kind of in the open. So the Belgian presidency of the Council, which is in charge of finding an arrangement, they will continue discussing, and they have a very limited time frame to do so because there will be the end of the European Parliament legislature in a month or so, a bit more than a month. So the time frame to reach an agreement is very short. So at the end of the day, we may not have CS3D in the coming months. That doesn't mean, luckily, that the conference is irrelevant for two reasons. The first one is that we have in France a duty of vigilance since 2017, which is not the most comprehensive legal text we've seen. It's basically 10 lines in the commercial code. That's a bit weak compared to the obligations it imposes on companies. And the good thing is that even if CS3D is not adopted, it's still a nice playbook on how to implement due diligence directives, because it basically summarizes two key soft law documents, the UN Guiding Principle and the OECD M&E guidelines. That's on the practical aspects, but obviously if that was just another nice soft law tool to have, that wouldn't really be helpful. What's also relevant is that even if we don't adopt CS3D, we still have the other big directive that was adopted, which is the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. CS3D and CSRD are two different texts. CSRD just tells you how you have to report what you do in terms of sustainability, but it doesn't tell you how you should do it. So under CSRD, if you say, look, to fight forced labor, I do absolutely nothing, and you publish it, it's fine. I mean, you're not obliged by CSRD to do anything, but you just have to disclose it. The only practical issue is that if you say in today's world, I don't do anything to fight forced labor, I don't really care, reputationally, I wouldn't like to be in your shoes. So basically what you will have to do under CSRD, which means also an assessment of your impact on those sustainability issues, which is something you should have done under CS3D. To do that, you can also inspire yourself from what was foreseen under CS3D. And I mean, again, that's a very nice playbook to have. It's nice to anticipate what you would have to do under CS3D because it's still relevant. And to conclude, I mean, CS3D might be dead for the next couple months. It doesn't mean it's dead for the long term.
All right, thank you, Edouard. It's kind of weird to say my own name. Okay.
It's okay to thank yourself.
Okay, so thanks a lot. Perhaps we can have insight from your side, Johannes, I guess.
So I'm a bit embarrassed to be speaking on behalf of the German state because that was really not a good show that the Germans have put on stage, and I feel with the Belgian rapporteur who was deeply concerned and thought it was bad manners how Germany behaved. So it's basically there was a deal done, and in the very last minute, one specific party that stands for a fraction of the German electorate, because they are going downhill, wanted to appease their core electorate and block a law that's, in my view, would have been beneficial for German businesses and also for European businesses as a whole, let alone, for the human rights situation in the world. And it's been basically the brainchild of the Minister of Finance and the Minister of Justice, who said, or who sort of replicated a lot of arguments that have been brought when the German Supply Chain Act was being discussed. And this is the sort of the interesting thing about this. We already have a law in place now for 2 years that is basically identical to what the CS3D is, triple D is. It's admittedly, the European directive is a little bit more stringent in a few ways. It applies to more companies, so companies from 500 people or 250 people, other than, in Germany it's 1,000. There is civil liability provisions that we don't have. You have to look further into the supply chain. We basically look to the to the immediate supplier rather than the more remote suppliers, unless we have substantiated knowledge. So that there are a few sort of tiny differences, but the main premises of the law, so how you need to have a due diligence policy, a human rights policy, you need to have a risk analysis, you need to have preventive measures and remedial measures, you need to have a complaint mechanism. All of this is basically the same. And the reason why it is the same is because it all comes from the UN guiding principles. So it's very odd that we now have a situation where German companies and companies doing business in Germany with more than 1,000 people on the ground have to already comply with a law that the FDP, who supposedly is pro-business, stops from being passed in Europe, and thereby creating a level playing field. And it's very unfortunate because it would not only apply across Europe, but also apply to companies from abroad that do business in Europe with more than 150 million. Which are not covered now by German laws, for example. So in my view, it's been a terrible mistake, and it's been done because there was some opposition, particularly in the community of the small and medium enterprises, who may not fall under the German law and who are afraid of bureaucracy, civil liability issues. There was lots of talk about how difficult this would be to be implemented. We have now seen, advising international and national clients on implementing the obligations under the German law, that yes, it takes some effort, but it's by no means undoable. It's if you sit down, have a working group, have maybe legal advice, or you can even do it without legal advice, it's really possible to comply with that law. So much of it was pushed through lobbying from certain parts of the German business community, where others, for example, the DEX companies, so all the large companies, and many progressive smaller companies who have a green image, they fought for this law to come into effect. And they're very disappointed, just as I am, in many other parts of the community. So basically this was dirty politics. And it's really weird that in the end, because Italy wanted to block a packaging directive, they made a deal with, well, if you veto the packaging, we're gonna veto, the due diligence directive, and this is how politics are made. And I think it's a really missed opportunity for the business community in Europe as a whole. And it's very unfortunate, but hope dies last. And I think while this law is probably not gonna be effective in the way it stands right now, I'm very, very confident that something similar will see the light of the day. And I have to echo what Edouard had just said. It's even if it's not now, eventually there will be a similar directive in Europe. I'm very sure. And it's good, and what we tell our clients that do business in Germany, because American clients, for example, they say, well, why should I care about this German law? Does it really affect me? Well, first, because you fall under the law, and second, what you're going to do here will be replicated across Europe and across other countries outside Europe. So you can take this and then leverage it into your entire activities around the globe. And that has worked for a few of our clients, and I think that's why this conference is still very relevant.
Thanks a lot, Johannes. So actually, even though for the technical reason, it has the regulation not going to come out in its actual form, but actually it's still relevant, still worth it to work on these subjects. And speaking to you, Sydney, on the US side, I know that the US has adopted a much narrower approach very similar to the UK, I think, unless mistaken. So could you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. So it's a little bit different than the UK system. The US law is essentially a human rights due diligence law that's focused on goods that are imported into the United States. So it's limited to forced labor, which is defined under ILO standards, International Labor Organization, UN standards. And it's, but it's very deep in the sense that the requirements to satisfy the authorities to demonstrate that your goods are allowed into the US is very high. So, and it's all grounded in UN principles, but I think the challenge is always about how do you implement those principles? And so in the United States, it's all about identifying your high risk. What is your supply chain? Many companies don't know their supply chain. What is your supply chain? Where is the high risk? So from a US perspective, there's a lot of enforcement around Uyghur labor in the Xinjiang region of China. Most of the enforcement right now is to try to prevent goods sourced, even in part from that region, from entering the United States. You may have heard recently a story about Volkswagen. Thousands of their cars are sitting at a US port because there was a part included in the car that was sourced from Xinjiang. And those cars are now sitting at the port while Volkswagen repairs all the cars, replaces the parts. So it's tremendously dislocating. It can really disrupt your supply chain. But it's all grounded in the same. So even if you don't, just because the law, the directive here may be delayed, if you have any sort of international exposure, you have to think about human rights due diligence. And I've been working with lots of companies who want to understand how to comply with US law, and they quickly realize they can't just compartmentalize their shipments to the United States. They have to think about it broadly. You can't just comply with this one supply chain because they're producing for all markets. So how do you identify risk? How do you then mitigate the risk that you find? Those are all things that you're going to have to do, regardless of the market you're in, and you're going to end up having to do it here too. So all of this entire exercise is really important.
Thanks a lot, Sydney. Now turning to the private sector, to say, well, we're all from private sector, but to the corporate world, if I may say so. Sébastien and Emmanuel, how do you, speaking to Sébastien, how do you perceive the EU ESG related developments, highlighting the impacts of this regulation, and emphasizing the need to involve everyone? And I remember during our preparation sessions, you use the word a journey, and this echoes in me. I also work in a big corporate, so could you please tell us more?
Yeah, for sure. So what is at stake definitively in the CSR part is a lot of transformation that are taking place. Because we already faced the taxonomy story, okay, where we are already fighting a lot to publish this report. We are currently working on the CSRD, and as of today, there is only the pioneer that are going to deliver part of the information this year. And after, what is going to come, it is the CS3D. So on a CSRD, on a CSR perspective, I'm going to be happy, in fact, that it is postponed because the workload we are facing is definitively very huge. Okay, and it is huge for large company, which is large corporate, in fact, that we have in France that are very mature companies. Okay, so what we are facing in terms of CSRD is so heavy that not managing this year the CS3D is definitively a good deal. Nevertheless, it can be voted and implemented within the next 3 years, and we can live with that. Okay, it's not a concern. What is interesting, I will say, in the CSRD, and that is connected to the CS3D, is definitively within the CSRD. What is at stake is that there is an increase of responsibility in this reporting. Okay. We will be asked, in fact, to have a deeper control or a deeper interactions with our suppliers. It could be for sure around the net zero trajectory, which is definitely an environmental topic, but there is another dimension which is called workers in the value chain. Okay, so on here, what is at stake is that you, as a company, you will need to ensure that you get data from your supplier. Okay, you got information. It is not about signing a contract and to say, you know, I made my job, you know, I make an audit, I make a contract, and I can live with that. It's not what is at stake. What is at stake is that you are going to get data information from your supplier, meaning that if those data are not relevant, are not good, you will need to set up, in fact, an action plan. Okay, and you will be responsible to control, to monitor, and to have an improvement plan. Okay, so for sure there is not strong penalties linked to that, but you will need to demonstrate that you take care and you have a higher level of responsibility, which is absolutely not the case as of today. As of today, we speak about sustainable procurement, where you need to ensure that you have responsible suppliers. Okay, and once the job is done, you have ratings made by the EcoVadis, which is a very nice statement. Definitely, it's something in which we have improved a lot. But now, what we need to do, it is to monitor our supplier. And when you start to monitor, that means that you have a deeper analysis, you have deeper action plan, and at the end, you have a very strong word that is called arbitration, and where you need to make the choice to keep the supplier or, in fact, to keep this relationship with the supplier. So it's not directly linked to the CS3D, definitely, but in the description I highlighted, you saw that things are changing, and the level of responsibility of those corporates are going to change, especially if you have interactions with other geographies, such as Africa or Asia.
Thanks a lot, Sébastien. Sydney, perhaps you would like to...
Yeah, I want to comment on something that was said because it's very important. This human rights due diligence in particular is a data exercise. And what US law changed to enforce, US law became, folks started focusing on forced labor in 2016. At that time, companies had no idea how to comply with the law, and the government had no idea how to enforce the law. And what we've learned over time is that companies were not well situated to analyze the problem. A lot of companies ask their lawyers or compliance directors to figure it out. But the skills that you need internally to analyze, what does your supply chain look like? How do you collect information? It's mostly accounting data that's required in order to analyze your supply chain. You need people who have audit skills with data. Almost, they need to look more like a tax auditor than a auditor, someone looking at bribery or sanctions or other issues. It's a very different skill, and a company needs to invest in those resources to bring those skills together, because not one person has them. The government has learned this too. They realize they've needed to bring different skills to this process. It can't just be lawyers at US Customs who are analyzing these issues because they don't understand the data they're getting. So structuring your internal operations correctly is a really important first step. And getting leadership or management to understand that they have to make that investment is really important.
Thanks a lot, Sydney. Now, Emmanuel, how do you see the risk, rising from the ESG-related developments? And I remember also during our preparatory sessions, you took the example of India, and this echoes something in me, because we do work in this country, in my company too. We do have different cultural approach, so they may not be able to adapt instantly. And I remember also you focused on potential distortion of competition, perhaps on the US aspects.
Yes, thank you, Gerard. I would like to add a very concrete aspect for company. I will talk about the aircraft industry, and the difficulty for us is really to ensure what is duty of vigilance. Everyone here under this table is sure that it will come in force in a few months probably, but we know it still exists in France, in Germany, and more generally, this duty of care, duty of vigilance, is really, for me, a characterization of the famous corporate social responsibility. We are talking about that, we are talking about human rights, and it's, even if it's still sometimes soft law in some country, it's nowadays really a reputational issue for a company. It's not possible to imagine that very young children work in your supply chain. It's not possible. But the problem, I think, with the way it was conceived is that it's, you know, an obligation of result, not only an obligation of mean, but an obligation of result. And I think that the problem is this obligation is very difficult for the procurement department, because it means you have to ensure that all your supply chain, all your supplier, level 1, level 2, level 3, everywhere in your world, respect this principle. And it's true that during our prep, I talk about my experience in India, for instance. And in India, if you are taking consideration about the labor of children, it's allowed. You can, a young children, age 13, can work in India. And this is a reality, because it's a very poor country. And it's a necessity for families. So you have, I may say, a competition between system of law, system of value. And for these countries, I mean, we are like foreigners, UFOs. It's something completely unrealistic to say to this kind of countries that you will not have anymore children, age 16, for instance, working in your company. So it's mean for European company, I think one day also American company, you have to convince your supply chain that it's not possible in terms of value, because legally it's possible in those countries. So it's first remark. Second remark, we think that it will be just enough for small business company to fill an application form. But you know, for instance, in the aircraft ecosystem with the small business company, they are not able to fill the application form. They are not able to understand what we are talking about. They are not able to control their own supplier, level 1, level 2. It's not possible. So really, I wonder if this good idea wasn't impossible, in fact, in reality. And you have to consider that a contractual clause, I mean the famous standard contractual clause you can put in a contract, is not enough to be sure that in reality you will not have children in your supply chain. Third point, I'm a little long, but I have a lot of message to say. Unfortunately, we test big platform. We talk about big platform like EcoVadis. And we hope that this kind of platform will prepare this work of due diligence on duty of care issue. And unfortunately, they don't know in India, in Indonesia, in Asia, the supply chain. So it means they are not able to help you to control the level, the maturity of this company. And finally, my concern is about the competition in the market between the European company, for instance, German, French company, and the other company coming from other continents, like our friend coming from the US. Because, in fact, the requirements are not the same. I mean, there is a distortion in the competition market because we have a new compliance issue. We can talk about GDPR. It's another compliance issue we have on the contrary of the American. So we also need a global answer about all these issues.
Thanks a lot, Emmanuel. Okay, so I have this question is off agenda, so I'm just jumping on Emmanuel intervention. It's open to Edouard, Johannes, and perhaps more to Sydney, actually. Emmanuel mentioned, referred to conflicting jurisdiction. I know this can be something in the US, about the aspect of child labor and the fact that, it's legal over there. So what we're gonna do? First thing, and the second one was, and the distortion of competition also with regards to the US. So perhaps if you could.
Well, the US has a way of handling the issue of what may be legal in a third country. And this is how it works. It's a little cynical, but this is how the US handles it. And I'll use by way of example, not China, because we focus a lot on China in the press, but we actually, our forced labor law applies to lots of products in lots of countries. So I've worked there. We have a prohibition in the United States on the importation of tobacco from Malawi, because in Malawi there is rampant use of child labor. And so in 2018, the US determined that they were going to issue a countrywide prohibition on tobacco from Malawi. Under the law, companies, importers in the US can seek an exemption. And in seeking an exemption, you have to demonstrate that the products you're importing into the United States are free of forced labor. You don't have to demonstrate that all the products you might source in Malawi and sell to other countries are free of forced labor. So in the United States, we handle it by focusing on what is coming into the United States. Now, if you were less cynical than I am, you might, there is still the benefit of, if the US is a large market, it's very difficult for them not to adjust their entire operation. But in a country like Malawi, it is impossible to vet your entire supply chain. So in Malawi, you can source tobacco two ways. You can source it directly from the grower, and as a US importer, you can do your due diligence on those growers. But by law in Malawi, you also have to source tobacco by auction. So by auction means it's being sold at a warehouse somewhere, but you don't know who grew it. So you can never audit your supply chain. So in Malawi, a producer in Malawi who is processing fresh tobacco, must purchase from auction, and you're allowed to also purchase from the grower, but you have to do both. And so the only way you can import into the US is if you can show that the only tobacco imported into the US is coming from a grower. It can't come from auction. That's our accommodation to Malawi local law. But that's the challenge. That's the challenge we face. And the same thing is true with China. If an importer purchases product from a Chinese supplier, let's say it's an engine, a car engine, we just have to know that that engine contains no components from Xinjiang, and that they don't use labor from Xinjiang. But what that supplier in China might sell to Malaysia and the a European country, that's not our business. So that's how the U.S. handles those issues.
Okay, thanks a lot, Sydney. You want to add something, perhaps, Johannes?
Not on that specific point, but maybe one highlight that gets dropped a little bit, and I do take your concerns very, very seriously, but what sometimes is a little bit misrepresented, and I don't want to insinuate that you did that, but a key term in this CSDD and as well in the German Supply Chain Act is the word appropriate or appropriateness. So what you have to understand is that you are never liable for something that happened in your supply chain personally or as a company. You are just liable for showing the effort of due diligence. So you're not supposed to make sure that there's no child working in the world. You're just liable that you showed the effort you needed to show under the very specific due diligence obligations. And those obligations are always under the heading of appropriateness. And the appropriateness, there are 4 factors that determine whether an action is appropriate, and you have to keep in mind the structure of your business, the nature of your business, the influence you have on a company. So how big is your share of wallet with your supplier? And all of that taken into account can lead to the fact or place then into the risk analysis where you identify your risky suppliers and then weigh and prioritize the risks. And it can be that some of these risks, specifically if you have like little input from India, let's say, which has a very high risk, but your influence on those suppliers is very limited and you have hardly any means of finding out. For example, because it's being traded on an auction or as a commodity and you never know where it comes from, then your obligations vis-a-vis that product or that supplier are very diminished. Whereas if you have a supplier that does almost exclusively business with you and you have been dealing with them for years, and it's in a jurisdiction where you have much more information or there have been news reports, then your obligations are much higher. So everything is sort of on a sliding scale, and which at least for the German and the European legislation of the draft gives you a little bit of leeway how you act and how you structure your risk analysis. You just, at the end of the day, you need to be able to stand in front of the enforcer and saying, this is my risk analysis, this is the measures I've taken, and I think that's appropriate, and you don't have to blush. And that's sort of the test you have to comply with.
What's kind of interesting about that is that in the US, it's very different. So in the US, there are no civil penalties. No one cares, there are no civil penalties. But effort, you can't, just showing effort isn't enough. So if your product gets stuck at the border, you have to prove. So if you have a supplier that won't share information with you, you can't use that, and you can't prove that they don't utilize forced labor, then you can't import your product.
Yeah.
So it's a narrower law. It's focused on, in the US, there's a concept of strict liability. Your motive, your effort, your intent is irrelevant. It's all about what you can show. And so that's why I come at it's very much a data exercise. It's all about data. But it's very different.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, I think it's... you want to add something, Emmanuel?
Yeah,
go ahead.
I'm not sure, a little disagree with that, because I think corporate social responsibility is a question of accountability, not liability. And I think that without an authority in charge with duty of vigilance, without guideline, we will be in a very insecure situation for the firm. In fact, we had this experience in France with when Sapin 2, the anti-corruption law, came into force, and we have seen the importance of the guideline of the French anti-corruption authority. So we can imagine a lot of interpretation, and there is another issue, is what will think the judge. We have a recent experience with La Poste last December, and it's this decision, we have a lot of interrogation about the interpretation by the French judge about this concept of duty of vigilance.
Thanks to you, thanks Emmanuel. Yeah, it is good we are having a debate now. Yes, I just wanted to add, because this echoes a discussion I have with German colleagues, because I know this, I think it's a cultural approach deep down, because German, I mean, you have, correct me if I'm wrong, but your law is very precise, and but
not this one, but the other side. That's true.
But nevertheless,
Yeah.
nevertheless, I mean, there's still a margin of appreciation, I would
Yes.
say. I mean, you can never say, I mean, it can never be 100%. I mean, and I know that you have an authority also for your
Yeah, I was about to say that.
Yeah.
So we're currently advising several clients that are facing the authority that enforces the act. And they have just started doing this. And the law requires the authority to give out guidelines on what risk analysis means. They're very nice, have nice pictures, but they don't say really much. So I mean, it's good information if you want to inform yourself. If you want to actually set up a risk analysis, they're absolutely useless. But the thing is, so that they had this authority, which is actually an authority that enforces like trade issues and all, and you know, for foreign direct investment. So nobody had any clue about supply chain, human rights whatsoever. So they set up a new office in a tiny town in Sachsen, which is the least state you want to live in. And they hired like 150 people who up to now probably didn't even know about what they were going to do. So they start from scratch too. And they're building sort of a practice of how to, and they actually hired, because they hired a Big Four company to tell them how they should be vetting risk analysis and risk management systems, because they had no clue whatsoever. So it's a sort of a going process, and here comes this appropriateness really into play, because it's so difficult because companies are so difficult. They're large and small, and their product portfolio is so different, that you always have to show in my specific case, this seems to be appropriate for the following reasons. And as long as you don't say, I didn't do anything, and you can plausibly show what you have done, you are probably in pretty good shape, at least for the first 1-2 years. That's exactly what the authority has already said. So, and there's also a reporting obligation, just like under the European directive, and it's sort of a form you can fill, and you can either say, oh, I haven't found any risks, and then you're done. Or you have a very long report. But you can be sure, if you said, I haven't found any risks, that you will get information request after information request, because it's impossible that if you're that big that you don't find any risk. So it's all about showing what you've done and plausibly explain that to the authority, which is also trying to find out how to deal with the law.
Okay, thanks, Johannes. Now, speaking to you and to Sébastien, to you and Emmanuel, it's a question to both of you, regarding how do you see, I would say, focusing on the threats, from the authorities in terms of, upcoming liabilities, and Emmanuel mentioned the case of La Poste that we have recently. Linked to that, we also have the reputational risk, which might come, and how do you prepare to that, and how do you deal with? I heard the word risk, so how do you deal with risk management internally?
I think we need to have a look on two topics. Okay, the first one is when we speak about compliance. That means that people need to respect a certain number of rules. Okay, when we speak about CSR, we more speak about having actions that are compliant with climate change, with biodiversity, with water. Okay, so what is at stake here is not to be compliant with a rule or a guideline. That means that we need to be aligned with a target, okay, or with a mindset. Meaning that the rule or the engagement that the CSR have to do, it is to define topics and to find solution, okay? Meaning that we'll be judged on our level of commitment, our level of improvement, which is definitively a high risk, okay? Because being compliant with the law, you know the law, you respect the law, you do not have any problem, okay? What is at stake in CSR? It is here you commit to be net zero. Okay, and this is what you saw with big petrol oil industry, is that they commit to net zero, and after, what is at stake is that it is mentioned that the NGO said it is not relevant because your level of ambition is not sufficient. You are not mobilizing the required means. Okay, and here you see that in that description, it's not about respecting something that is written. What is at stake is that we need to assess if the ambition is sufficient or not. Okay, if the means are sufficient or not, and if the solution you have made are the good ones. Okay, so definitively the level of interpretation and the level of construction is definitively more complex, just rather than just checking the law. Okay, so this is the field that is currently opening. Alors, we'll have years to orchestrate that transformation. We'll have some people that are able to challenge us, such as the AMF, the French regulator, or the auditors, where they will say, your level of ambition or what you are stating is not at the level that is expected to tackle the water topics or circular economy, and you need to improve. But definitively, it gives you, in fact, a view about how within CSR we need to engage the company, we need to mobilize the means to ensure that we are aligned with more a target than a law.
Thanks a lot, Sébastien. Emmanuel?
Yeah, just a few words. We talk a lot about Germany and the position of the German state on this on the drafting of the directive, but we have to say that France also changed its point of view. And for me, I think it was a good idea to enlarge the size of the company concerned by the future directive. Because as I said, my concern is about the small business company. And the small business company are not able, if they are not large enough, to ensure such an obligation. So I think we have to be careful about that. It's very important because if we don't do that, a lot of small business company will not be able to be onboarded by the group. I mean, we will put a harsh contractual clause, and the small business will not be able to ensure that. So the question of the application, finally, of the directive and the size of the company concerned by it is very important.
Thank you. No, I just have one quick comment on the size of the company, and that goes back to what I said earlier. If we look at CSRD, one of the things you are supposed to do is a materiality assessment, and that involves an impact materiality assessment. So that means what is your impact on certain sustainability issues. That's pretty much a big leg of what CS3D would have required you to do. And CSRD, its scope of application, I mean, it applies to companies that are much smaller than those that would have been subject to CSRD. So I think I agree that there is an issue in terms of bureaucracy and everything and data collection, and it's much more difficult for SMEs. But the fact is that under the laws that have already been adopted, they will already have a substantial administrative burden, and they need to be aware of that. Where I agree, though, is that maybe putting them, subjecting them to the exact same enforcement rules, both administrative and civil liability, maybe that needs to be adjusted. But at the end of the day, the requirement to look at their supply chains, again, they will have to do it in a way, maybe not to the same extent, but at least in a way under CSRD. And also turning to the topic of it being difficult for smaller companies to consider all those issues, I think it's important also to go back to what we were saying earlier, that there is actually a massive learning curve in the EU when it comes to what it means to be sustainable, what it means in terms of obligations. And it's not just companies that are learning the ropes. It's also authorities, it's also auditors. Everyone is kind of learning step by step and learning by exchanging. So, I mean, there should be probably also more support to SMEs to make sure that they can contribute and get the information they need to be compliant.
Alors, maybe one comment here, in fact, because for CSRD, we have the same topic. As of today, in France, we should have around 500 CSR officers. Okay, moving to CSRD in France, that means that we'll have 6,000 companies that will be no scope, meaning that we are missing a lot of resources, more than 5,000. Okay, and effectively, you can have the same approach, which is how a small company is able to pay a CSR officer. What will be the use to have such a guy? Okay. So the current situation is that currently the companies that are doing, in fact, what we call the NFRD, it is skilled company, mature company, and they have those resources. Definitively, they are making homemade CSR, okay? But when the market is enlarging, multiply by 10, what is going to happen? What is going to happen? It is going to industrialize, okay? Meaning that you will have new players entering this field, able to meet, in fact, those companies and to say, hey, I make the analysis for you, okay? I know what your key players are doing in your industry. This is what you have to do. Okay, I'm going to support you quite easily because as the market is big, I'm going to make an investment. I'm going to guide you, in fact, on that dimension. You don't need a CSR officer at all. You need maybe a CSR coordinator able to do it. But as the market is big, in fact, definitively, we should expect that people will enter in that market and to industrialize and to provide services for those companies. And after, they will copy-paste, definitively, because when you are in the same industry, you are facing the same challenge than the big player. Okay, so this opportunity can be investigated because definitively, the market is going to change.
Thanks a lot, Sébastien. You have already started answering, Edouard, actually, the question.
No,
it was
sorry,
about the...
I was thinking internally that, this is what usually called as multi-stakeholder initiatives or joint party initiatives, and that's actually highly encouraged by authorities. At the same time, we also have private consultants or lawyers, let's face it. That's also something we've seen with the anti-corruption mechanism, with money laundering. It's not infrequent for smaller companies to rely on what the bigger companies have developed over the years.
All right, so just if you could, continue in this line of thought and and tell us about the specific requirements on the CS3D, since as we know now that even though the text would not be adopted in its actual form, it's just a question of time. We're going to have something sooner or later.
CS3D is very much aligned with what you have under the duty of vigilance, except that instead of having one line, you have several articles for each requirement. So actually the first element is pretty, it's not in the duty of vigilance, but it kind of flows from it, is that you have to have a code of conduct and integrate due diligence into your practices. The second element is, and actually it's the most important one, it's risk mapping. So you have to identify, assess, and prioritize risks. Those risks being the risks of adverse impacts on environmental and human rights, which are actually, again, contrary to the French duty of vigilance, there is a definition for those by reference to a pretty long list of international conventions without really saying what you should be looking at in those conventions. But still, it's better than just saying you have to comply with human rights, which probably is the broadest statement ever. The third element, and I'm trying not to forget one, the third element is the...
preventive measures? Risk mitigation.
And I'm drawing a blank.
Preventive measures.
Preventive measures, thank you. I had the French duty. I was thinking about assessment of counterparties, so it's actually in there. Adequate measures, so you have to take measures to mitigate risks, so the potential risks must be mitigated, and the actual risks have to be mitigated or remediated where you were the one causing that damage. You have a requirement to have an alert mechanism. Again, same thing under the French duty of vigilance. You have requirements to publish what your efforts are in terms of due diligence, something you wouldn't have to do if you are already making publications under CSRD, but that makes sense. Again, that's very similar to the French duty of vigilance. A point that is a bit novel is that you would be required by law to keep records of what you're doing. And actually, I mean, at the end of the day, if you look at all the measures that are foreseen under CS3D, it's pretty funny because the expectation is very different from compliance in the fields of financial crime. And yet, in terms of structure, you're using exactly the same tools. So that's code of conduct, risk mapping, evaluations, internal alerts, investigations, remediation, all these things, and actually record keepings, which is something that is mostly normally in financial crime. Well, you end up with all that list that compliance folks know really well how to structure and frame. But I mean, I've done compliance my whole life. If you ask me to explain, that's what Sébastien was mentioning earlier, how you reduce by 4 the amount of water you use to make a chair, I have absolutely no idea. And I will need to rely on someone else. And I think companies should do the same. That means you need to really leverage resources from all your departments that may be relevant. And that includes, of course, legal and compliance, but also internal audit, financial audit, supply chain, HR, really basically pretty much everyone in the company has to be involved. So it's a lengthy process. And it's not fully clear from the actual duty of vigilance in France whether you should do all that. But it flows also from the fact that if you look at the legislative history of the French duty of vigilance, it relies heavily on the UN guiding principles. It's basically the inspirations. Some concepts are mostly copy-paste. And the current CS3D actually explains to you a little bit better what it means. So it's not a complete, and that's voluntary, it's not a complete tick-the-box approach. So it's not like, yeah, that I can check, it's done. It's really just a framework of what you should do, but then the implementation is voluntary left. I mean, the details are voluntary left blurry because there is no one-size-fits-all solution. Everything has to be adapted to your sector, to the countries where you operate, to your size, to your activities. It's really something that needs to be holistic in terms of assessment and that needs to look at each specific case individually.
You want to add something, Johannes?
No, I couldn't add anything. It's just, it's so funnily striking how similar it is in Germany because it's exactly, I mean, the reason is because it all goes back to the same UN guiding principles. And it's exactly as you said, it's very clearly spelled out in the law pretty much, at least the sort of the broad concept what you are supposed to do. So
It's the exact same in the US. I mean, those are the exact same requirements under, customs guidance on how to comply with US forced labor law. They're the exact same. It's all about how you do it. I mean, that's the complicated part.
In the end, it's like a compliance management system. If you call it risk management system or compliance management, it's all the same concepts. And what I really want to underline is the point that you're mentioning that pretty much everybody is involved. It's true. These working groups that have been implementing the obligations under the German Supply Chain Act have featured people from HR to purchasing, of course, a lot of purchasing, that there are ESG or CSR people involved, there's legal involved, there's compliance involved. Because, for example, you need to have a complaint mechanism. So you have compliance people coming in and it's a very diverse group of people on these calls trying to come up with the rules and processes to implement. But I really want to underline that it takes an effort, but it's doable and companies have done it before, so don't be afraid.
Just one difference we forgot to mention. Germany actually implement their duty of vigilance with an administrative authority that can impose fines. In France, we don't have an administrative authority, so that's really nice because nobody can tell you what you should be supposed to do. It's always better when you have to apply the law. And even the Constitutional Council said, well, that law is way too vague, you can't incur penalties for that. So we don't have either administrative or criminal penalties, but you can be sued. And so that leaves in the hand of judges who pretty much have never had to deal with these issues. The big issue of interpreting that law and actually detailing what your obligations are. And we discussed before, I mean, we have so far one judgment on substance that tells you what you should do to comply with the obligations of the duty of vigilance. I'm not sure anyone in this room would find that specific judgment gives precise guidance as to what you should do. because apart from saying that the risk mapping needs to be precise and comprehensive, it pretty much stops there. It's a bit more difficult probably to implement in France. It would be great to have an authority, and actually even the initial rapporteur of the Commission des Lois have said the same thing, that we need an authority because without one, nobody knows what to say. And there is no one really, I mean, even within the French administration, I don't think there is so many people that are familiar with sustainability issues. At most, you have the Direction Générale du Trésor, where you have people from the national contact point. And that's probably a handful of people. So it's...
And a special chamber in the court
And
of
yeah, now you have that.
Yeah.
But I mean, there is a special chamber in the Court of Appeal that has never rendered any judgment. So they don't have any specific experience on the matter either. But it's true. I mean, maybe over time that will develop, and maybe over time we'll have a consistent body of case law. But to get that consistent body of case laws, that means, first of all, that you would have companies be challenged, be prosecuted, and possibly, I mean, you don't have fines, but you have name and shame, which is not so great. And that may happen.
Sydney wanted to add something.
Well, you triggered something that's worth mentioning, because the question I always get is, do you have something, can you give me something, give me guidance, what do I have to do, and then we'll go do it. That's companies want, they think there's a questionnaire or a list of things they need to do that's detailed enough that they could go then just do the work. And I think the reason you cannot get more specific than UN guidance or sort of these more general laws is because there is no one way that a company can satisfy these laws. Companies are so different. You have to actually do due diligence learning about a company before you can even tell them what they have to ask. What is it that they have to do? You have to do due diligence first. You need to learn. And a lot of times the companies don't understand themselves. Or someone over there will understand something about the company and someone over there will understand something else. And so I think don't ask people what is it that what do we need to do? I think the first question should be, what do we need to ask ourselves? Like, what information do we need to know about ourselves before you, the expert, can tell us how we can build a compliance system that will work? So,
Thanks, Sydney. Emmanuel, you wanted to add something about the private-public partnership?
Yes, so we are asking we request a French authority to help us to understand what it is. But no, I just want to add something about the name and shame. Because without a precise law, hard law, and we, in France especially, we have a specific litigation behind the court with NGOs. And it became a way to sometimes fragilize a big French company. I was thinking about Total, Vinci, for instance, and because of the lack of precision of the duty of care obligation, you have this possibility open to everyone who won't contest because of politics or ideology, and it's something very complicated for big company. Just an example, of course, Dassault Aviation is an aircraft company, but also a military company. And we have the same issue about topics like anti-corruption, for instance, because for NGO or other party, the litigation is a way to contest, a way to, how can I say, to highlight message, particular message. And I think it's not a good way for France. And because of that, we have seen atermoiement behind the judge, because you have seen at the beginning it was the commercial court. After that, it was the civil court of Paris. And it was le juge des référés. And after that, it was the judge who decided the ground. So I think there is really a vulnerability. That's why maybe the delay of yesterday for the European directive, it's not a good news for the big company.
Thanks a lot, Emmanuel. A question to you now, Sébastien. You mentioned earlier the need to embark people, and we have seen after this discussion of today the complexity of this regulation and conflicting jurisdiction, data, etc. And I know, working internally in the big companies, how to embark people, the salesperson, the
for the salespeople, it's quite easy, in fact. no, because
really?
I'm going to tell you why. Because
Right.
we speak about the suppliers. We speak about the suppliers like it was different people. But we are suppliers from our customer. Okay, so when you saw the sales guy, they start to understand we are there to support them. So they are pleased to ring us, okay, and tell us, Sébastien, the customer is asking me, what do we do regarding those topics? Okay, so and the sales guy, in fact, when they understood that you have a competitive advantage, they are very pleased to call you. They are very pleased to call you. So those people are convinced, and they are pretty happy, in fact, to say, I have actions in my company where I can explain to my customer that I am a good supplier. I am compliant. I'm doing things. I am ambitious. Okay, and this is where you make the differences between companies that are just following the law, following the regulation, and the ones that have identified that by doing things good, okay, properly, they can demonstrate, in fact, the willingness of the management and the attraction of the people. So definitively, those people from the sales, it's good guys. It's good guys. So voilà. So after, there is a lot of challenges. Okay. What is drastically changing in the last months is that everyone understood that we need to have actions. Okay, we need to have actions regarding the climate. We need to have actions regarding biodiversity. We need to have actions regarding the water. What is at stake is what do we do? Okay, what are the actions I need to engage? Okay, what makes sense? Okay, and don't tell me what I need to stop. Okay, tell me where I can find a way without any additional cost. I will never pay for nothing. Okay, this is not going to happen. Okay, and the way you interact with your customer, it is to with your supplier. It is to say, tomorrow, in fact, what I want the same product, but with less environmental impact. This is what I want. Meaning that I'm not challenging the price at all. Maybe if you can go for cheap, that's better for sure. But you need to rethink, in fact, the way you are operating your company, because I want environmental benefits. Okay, so it looks to be a new topic, but the very, very good news is that we never investigated that dimension. Never. Okay, we always answer to the question is how many quantities, what's the quality, what's the price. Okay, if I want a product that has a low environmental impact, I need to investigate. And the very, very good news is, as I never had this investigation, when I'm going to start, I'm going to find plenty of good ideas for free. For free. Okay, so that's the good news. For sure, it's not working for all the dimensions. If we go for automotive industry, moving for electricity, it's a very high cost. It's plenty of for investment, for capex. But in many dimensions, in fact, for sure, we need to investigate. We need to make calculation. But in many dimensions, in fact, we are going to make some savings. Yourself, you are not asking yourself what the environmental impact of this phone. Never. And you have no clue about what the impact. If I'm going to tell you that I can save, 20% of the environmental topic, you say, I want this phone for the same price. For sure, because for you, it will be no cost. It's not like the same. If I told you, no car at all, now you take your foot. Voilà, so it's the difference. So in such dimension, in fact, by making education, by putting numbers on the table, you, like the companies, are going to make new choices regarding environmental impact, and you will go, in fact, for quick solution that will be dramatically efficient at the beginning. At the end, for sure, it will be costly. At the end, it will be costly.
Thanks a lot, Sébastien. Emmanuel, the same question to you. How do you?
I'm not specialized in environmental aspect. In aircraft, we try to reduce the carbon footprint, of course, but everyone here can understand that it's not possible by now to stop this proportion.
No, my point was, how do you anticipate this implementation? And again, the same question with regards to, how to
Okay.
embark people,
Okay.
because I guess this is
Yes.
challenging to
So for me, is ESG. It's mainly social and governance. It's very important in these topics, and so you understood for us, duty of care with the human right aspect is really huge, important consideration about reputational risk. So we try 3 things. First, we are testing an online platform to ensure, I may say, a first due diligence. So we talk about EcoVadis, but there is other platform who propose new services on this due diligence. But I told you that unfortunately they not really know the world of the supply chain in some continent like Asia, for instance. Second, of course, I think every company is reinforcing our supplier questionnaire, are reinforcing our duty of vigilance clause in our contract. But I think the third, the most important aspect is finally to organize control on your supply chain when you think there is an important risk. So it's a question of risk management of a compliance system. And for us, for instance, we create something new in Indonesia, in India, in order to be able to control a supplier if we have suspicion of human rights, for instance, of children labor. But it's a beginning, and really, with this imprecision on the French law, without, unfortunately, a European directive, I consider it's complicated for the company.
Okay, thanks a lot, Emmanuel. I think we have covered pretty much the question, the topic. Unless you have something to add, I think the floor is yours now. Do you have any question? Go ahead. Yeah.
Yes. Sorry. You are talking about supplier, but you're missing one point. I think you talk about all your supplier, but you have different supplier, production and outside production. However, most of compliance treats all suppliers in the same way. And you say that you reinforce your control with platform and questionnaire, etc. But if you have a supplier, not a product supplier, but an outside production supplier, you will receive by your 3,000 customers the same questionnaire, and just the time to answer to half of them, you have already finished the year, and the next year you will receive the same questionnaire, and you have to answer and you will be late, so you will never reach the compliance with this system. And to go a little bit further of what Sébastien said, it's not just someone to help us to comply with what we need. It's a certification procedure we need.
Yes.
And to have a certification by an authority. Like that, you just provide your number, your score, and that's it.
Who's going to take this one?
Yes, very good question, really, very good. Of course, questionnaire is not the best answer. It's by now, it's only way we have, and if you are controlled, if a company control, you have these questionnaires, meaning you try to do something, you try to change the supplier who want to work with you and adopt your value. You have to know that if you consider only the French company in the CAC 40, a study showed that for this company of the CAC 40, they deals with 3 million supplier level 1. 3 million supplier level 1. Understood? So it's impossible. I mean, it's a problem of when you have principle. You know, this principle before was soft law embodied by OCDE of short. And we decide, maybe it's a good thing, we decide to traduce them in hard law. It's law. But we see in this subject the difficulty to apply this law. 3 million level 1 supplier for the company of the CAC 40.
And how many of those were read? Right? Isn't that even worse? You're asking these questions to so many of your suppliers. I mean, I have companies who send out 1,000 questionnaires a quarter. Do they read them? And now they have information. There could be a problem embedded in one of those responses. There's no due diligence because they're just sending the questionnaire because that's what they're supposed to do. No one's actually reviewing them to see if the responses are any good. So the questionnaire system, the questionnaire system is a failure. I mean, the idea of a certification system is a really good one.
I mean, what I can add, there are certain industries at least that have, because there were vendors that were so prominent that they were endorsed by sort of the trade association, specifically in the automotive industry. So you have NQS, who is a player like EcoVadis. It's very focused on automotive industry. So virtually every OEM uses their questionnaire, and every supplier has to answer the questionnaire, which has the benefit that they really answer only one questionnaire because they can rely that be it Volvo or Mercedes or BMW, they're all going to take the same. Again, it's this questionnaire approach, do you hit your child at home? Yeah, of course I do, every night. I mean, it's a self-assessment questionnaire, SAQ. So is that really much of a value? But at least it tries to cope with the problem that you cannot answer to 1,500 questionnaires at the same time.
Okay.
That's why the platform could be a solution, because if you are already embedded by the platform, it will be used by the other company.
Exactly.
Because
Go ahead.
it's
Yeah.
true that you cannot send a questionnaire to everybody, but it's also true that you cannot send a spook to any factory in Asia to make sure that what was in the questionnaire was right or not. But I also wanted to talk about the French law, because we are in a situation now, because of the fact that the CS3D wasn't adopted, is that we are stuck with the duty of care. And I was so hopeful that we would be helped by the transposition of the directive into French law. But nevertheless, we have to take care of what is going on at the Senate these days, because they are interviewing professionals as to the future of the French duty of care law. And because I think that they wanted to start to work on how to modify it in view of the directive. Now that the directive is lost somewhere, also because of the French, not only the Germans.
I took the blame.
No, we have to say it. I think that we have to make sure, because some people were interviewed in the last days and suggested that maybe we didn't need to have any agency to supervise the application of the law, and that maybe judges would be trained enough at some point to be able to supervise the application of the law. I'm not sure it's the good solution. So I think that we should continue to lobby them to make sure that they come up with the idea to create an agency, or maybe to merge it with another one. I'm not going to say any name, but maybe that's something that the French Compliance Society could be doing, send a letter to the Senate.
Yes. Edouard,
Point
please,
taken.
please call Emmanuel Macron right now. We're convincing him tonight.
Point taken. Another, all good? Okay, so thanks a lot, everyone. Thanks Edouard, Sébastien, Emmanuel, Sydney, Johannes. Thanks a lot for your... And once again, thanks Virginie, Risques, Vous. Thanks Maya Brown for hosting us tonight. And thanks you, Linda, EQS Group, who is our sponsor. Thanks a lot. Bye.